Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Burke-Bryant, Executive Director of Rhode Island Kids Count, and I am really, really pleased to welcome you to our virtual release of our newest issue brief, which is Child Poverty in Rhode Island. We are so glad to have you all with us today on this Zoom virtual release to be able to put in your hands the latest data available on child poverty in Rhode Island. Children most at risk of not achieving their full potential are children who live in poverty. Children in poverty, especially those in poverty in early childhood or for extended periods of time, are more likely to have physical and behavioral health problems, live in food insecure households, experience difficulty in school, become teen parents themselves, earn less as adults, be unemployed more frequently, and fall below the poverty line at least once later in their lives. In Rhode Island, children of color and children of immigrants are more likely to grow up in poverty and live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. We are going to have a very rich discussion today. I just want to point out that in this very, very important time for our country to do better, to fight racism, to have opportunity for all of our children, including our children of color, to point out that structural and institutional racism, low educational attainment, part-time or no employment, and low wages of parents place children at risk of growing up and remaining in poverty. We, in the wake of the horrendous murder of George Floyd and so many intolerable acts of racism in this country, this is a very important time to really dive deeply into the topic of child poverty. There are so many people that are coming together in this country right now and really wanting to do something. We have been so impressed at Rhode Island Kids Count at the incredible energy of all of the young people that are leading the way in protests and in courses of action across the country. What better way to really insist upon equity and opportunity for all people in our country than really looking at this area of child poverty where there have been glaring and long time disparities that absolutely have to be removed. So what we're going to be doing today is having a presentation of our issue brief by Paige Clausius-Parks. She is our senior policy analyst at Rhode Island Kids Count that covers education and economic well-being issues. We are also going to be having Paige moderate a wonderful panel that she will be introducing. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer and discussion for everyone to be able to join in on. And before I proceed, I just wanted to say a few housekeeping items. Child poverty, and our hashtag is hashtag child poverty RI. So please make sure to tweet if you'd like. This entire event is being recorded. And the other thing that we'd like to do just to have a sense of community is to have you please type your name and organization, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, because then we can have a rolling list of who's here. If you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A feature on Zoom, or you can use the raise your hand function. I just wanted to say before we get started that all of our work at Rhode Island Kids Count would not be possible without the strong support of our partners. And I would really like to thank Hasbro and Hasbro Children's Fund for their very, very important support for this issue brief. And I'd like to turn this over just to have a few words of welcome from Kevin Coleman, who is Director, Global Philanthropy and Social Impact at Hasbro. Kevin?
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for your partnership. Hasbro has been a proud supporter of Kids Count for many, many years, and we're thrilled to sponsor and work together on yet another issue brief. Of course, you mentioned, these are unprecedented times, and we've seen the pandemic and the fight for racial justice expose the extreme inequalities in our communities. And throughout the past few months, we've seen the issues of poverty exacerbated globally, but especially in Rhode Island as well. So that's why at Hasbro, we see this work as crucially important as we forge a path forward together. Funding the research and disseminating this information across the state helps us all not only learn of the inequalities that exist, but determine how to make changes that improve our state and ultimately create a more positive outcome for our children. So, you know, just a few thoughts there, but, you know, just want to, again, just reiterate that we're so thankful to be able to fund this work, but we're really thankful to you, Elizabeth, and the entire Kids Count team for all you do, you know, this important work every day, day in and day out. And, you know, thank you to the panelists who will provide insight and bringing this issue brief to life. But, you know, just wanted to add that thanks and looking forward to a really insightful discussion during this important time for our country and our state. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's, again, great to work with you and your colleagues, and thank you so much for the support. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to Paige Closhis-Parks. She has worked very hard on this issue brief. It has been a long time coming. There's just so much information on child poverty. And during Rhode Island being in the midst of this pandemic, there are so many parts of the pandemic that are falling particularly hard on the most vulnerable children and families in Rhode Island, including those who are poor, families of color in marginalized communities, and children and families who are immigrant families. And all of those lenses, and through an equity lens, is how we are doing this work. So we are really pleased to give you the highlights now. And I want to thank again, as you will see, as a growing list of the chat box has names and organizations, what a wide array of philanthropic leaders, elected officials, people on the front lines of our community work, people in diverse communities across the state are with us today. And I'm so glad you're here. And now I'd like to turn it over with great thanks to Paige Closhis-Parks to take it away with the highlights of the issue brief.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I am Paige Closhis-Parks, Senior Policy Analyst at Rhode Island Kids Count. I am honored today to present highlights from our most recent issue brief, Child Poverty in Rhode Island. This is a timely conversation, and I hope that the data presented today will contribute to the critical dialogue on how to improve the economic well-being of Rhode Island's children. I first want to begin by thanking the Hasbro Children's Fund for their support of this publication and virtual event. So to begin our conversation today, let's first define poverty. The official poverty threshold was set by the federal government in 1963 and was based on the cost of a minimum diet for a family of 4. The cost of food was multiplied by 3 because at that time, about one third of families' after-tax expenditures was spent on food. Since then, the federal poverty threshold has been adjusted annually based on increases in the Consumer Price Index, but the method of calculating the federal poverty threshold has not been adjusted to account for the changes in families' expenditures, such as the rising cost of housing, transportation, childcare, and healthcare, and nor does it account for geographic differences in the cost of living. In 2019, the official poverty threshold was $2,598 for a family of 3 with 2 children, and $2,926 for a family of 4 with 2 children. In 2010, the federal government developed a supplemental poverty measure to address some of the limitations of the federal poverty threshold. This measure takes into account tax payments and a family expenditures on basic needs such as food, shelter, clothing, and utilities. The SPM does not replace the official poverty threshold, but serves as another indicator of economic well-being and the effect of policy decisions and taxes and benefits on the poor. The Federal Poverty Guidelines, or FPL, is based on a simplified version of the federal poverty threshold and used to determine the financial eligibility for federal programs, such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, and Head Start. And finally, the Rhode Island Standard of Need is a measure calculated by the Economic Progress Institute that considers multiple factors, including the cost of housing, food, transportation, childcare, and healthcare, as well as the cash value of tax credits and income support programs such as SNAP, Child Care Assistance, and Right Care, to show what it costs for families to make ends meet. In 2018, a single parent raising a preschooler and a school-age child would need $55,115 a year to pay basic living expenses, more than 2.5 times the federal poverty level for a family of 3. So as Elizabeth stated earlier, children most at risk of not achieving their full potential are children who live in poverty, especially those in poverty in early childhood or for extended periods of time. In Rhode Island, children of color and children of immigrants are more likely to grow up in poverty and live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. Addressing child poverty in Rhode Island requires a multifaceted approach, including strategies that attract high-wage jobs, improve the education level of our current and future workforce, provides access to job training, literacy programs, and English language acquisition, and prioritizes race equity. Child poverty in the US and Rhode Island increased during the 2008 recession and remained higher for several years after the end of the recession. In 2018, 18% of Rhode Island's 200,202 children under the age of 18 with known poverty status lived in households with incomes below the federal poverty threshold. Rhode Island's child poverty rates declined from 21.5% in 2018 to 18% in 2018, while the US rates also declined from 22.2% to 18% during that same time period. Almost 2/3, or 64%, of Rhode Island's children living in poverty lived in just the 4 core cities. These cities, which we term core cities, include Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket, all communities in which more than 1 in 4 children live below poverty. Between 2014 and 2018, 35.5% of children in the 4 core cities lived in poverty, compared to 9.8% in the remainder of the state. Rhode Island child poverty rate remains significantly higher than it was prior to the 2008 recession. In 2018, Rhode Island had the highest child poverty rate in New England and the 28th best in the United States. The negative effects of poverty on children last well beyond childhood and into adolescence and adulthood. Both nationally and in Rhode Island, young children from birth through age 5 are more likely to be poor than any other age group. Between 2014 and 2018, 19.7%, which is just over 12,800, of all Rhode Island children under age 6 lived in poverty. Of the children who lived in poverty during this time period, 34% were ages 5 and younger. Poverty is linked to toxic stress, which adversely alters early brain development that serves as the basis for learning, behavior, and health later in life. Studies show that investing in evidence-based interventions early and throughout a child's life course could have large and long-lasting effects on adult outcomes. The U.S. Census collects data on child poverty by family structure. Rhode Island Kids Count recognizes that family structures are diverse and are not adequately captured by the definitions used by the U.S. Census. However, we feel it is important to include the best available data about Rhode Island's children in poverty. In Rhode Island, children living in single-parent families are more likely to live in poverty than children living in 2-parent families. Single-parent families have only 1 potential wage earner compared to 2 potential wage earners in a 2-parent family. Between 2014 and 2018 in Rhode Island, 37% of children in single families lived in poverty, compared to 7% of children in married coupled families. Of the children who lived in poverty during this time period, 66% lived in families headed by an unmarried female. Of all children living in poverty in Rhode Island between 2014 and 2018, over half, or 56%, were white, 13% were Black, 2% were Asian, 2% were Native American, 16% were some other race, and 11% were two or more races. However, Native American, Hispanic, and Black children are more likely than white and Asian children to live in families with incomes below the federal poverty threshold. Between 2014 and 2018 in Rhode Island, 63% of Native American, 35% of Hispanic, and 26% of Black children in Rhode Island lived in poverty, compared to 12% of Asian children and 14% of white children. It is important to note, using census definitions, Hispanic children may be included in any race category. Between 2014 and 2018, 17,896, or 48%, of Rhode Island's 37,402 children living in poverty were Hispanic. Rhode Island's child poverty rate remained significantly higher than it was prior to the 2008 recession. The effects of the recession persisted well past the official end of what was the longest on record since World War II. The COVID-19 pandemic has been the world's greatest challenge since World War II, and poverty rates are projected to increase dramatically. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Rhode Island's unemployment rate has surged to 17%, higher than the worst levels in the Great Recession, and revenue is expected to decline dramatically in fiscal years 2020 and fiscal years 2021. Loss of employment in low-income households is expected to impact economic mobility and have devastating, long-lasting effects on children in poverty. Black and Hispanic households are projected to face the greatest increase in poverty, and racial and ethnic disparities may be exacerbated if people of color face greater employment disadvantages. Collecting data on the scale and nature of the impact on children, expanding public assistance programs that meet the immediate needs of families, and prioritizing child-centered services with a focus on equity will help inform policymakers and minimize the impact of the pandemic on our most vulnerable children and families. Assets and wealth are financial safety nets that enable families to deal with unexpected expenses and disruptions of income without accumulating large amounts of debt. However, historic policies such as the Homestead Act, the Federal Housing Act, and the GI Bill built the foundations of the American middle class by facilitating homeownership, business development, and college attainment. However, people of color were excluded from many of these wealth-building opportunities due to discriminatory policies in housing, banking, and education. The wealth-building opportunities denied to people of color in the past generations continue to reverberate in the lives of their children. In the US, in 2011, the median white household had $146,000 in wealth holdings, compared to just $7,113 for median Black households and just over $8,000 for the median Latino household. Disaggregated data by race illustrates how discrimination in housing, banking, and education impacts people of color and creates unacceptable disparities. Between 2014 and 2018 in Rhode Island, the median income for white families was just over $88,500. And then in Rhode Island, that's higher than Asian families and much higher than that of Black, which is just over $49,900. And Hispanic, which is just over $40,600, and Native American, just over $35,700. In Rhode Island, in 2019, the unemployment rate among white workers was 3.3% compared to 4.6% for Black workers and 6.1% for Hispanic workers. Nationally, the unemployment rate for white workers in 2019 was 3.3% compared to 6.1% for Black workers and 4.3% for Hispanic workers. During this same time period in Rhode Island, white households were the most likely to own their own homes, while Native American, Hispanic, and Black households were the most likely to live in rental units. In the US, Black and Native American children are 7 times more likely, and Latino children are nearly 5 times more likely to live in neighborhoods with a high concentration of poverty than white children, and have limited access to healthy food, quality public schools, and medical care, and have increased exposure to environmental hazards, violence, and negative interactions with law enforcement. In 2010, 2/3, or 67% of all children of color in Rhode Island lived in the 4 core cities of Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket. Families with incomes below 50% of the federal poverty threshold are considered to be living in extreme poverty. In 2019, the extreme poverty level was $10,299 for a family of 3 with 2 children, and $12,963 for a family of 4 with 2 children. The 4 core cities have substantial number of children living in extreme poverty. Education has been a road out of poverty for many low-income people. However, in Rhode Island, students in the core cities consistently have lower reading and math proficiency rates, have lower graduation rates, and are less likely to enroll in college than their peers compared to their peers in the remainder of the state. High poverty schools that are successful at raising student achievement have strong leaders, regularly communicate high expectations for students and staff, nurture positive relationships among adults and students, have a strong focus on academics, use student data to individualize instruction, make decisions collaboratively, employ enthusiastic and diligent teachers, and effectively select, cultivate, and use personnel. Conditions affecting both parents and children are interrelated. A 2-generation approach can positively impact children's development and economic stability, including increasing the education, skills, and training of low-income and unemployed or underemployed parents. The need for workers with post-secondary training and education is increasing and will intensify in the near future. More than 1 in 10 Rhode Island adults over age 25 have less than a high school education in 2018. Of these adults, 29% had incomes below the poverty threshold. Adults with higher levels of education were more likely to be in the labor force and to be employed in Rhode Island. Increasing the education, skills, and training of low-income and underemployed parents is vital to economic success and child and family well-being. Now to discuss the many state and federal programs that help improve the lives of low-income children and families in Rhode Island. Rhode Island Works. So the goal of the Rhode Island Works program is to help parents make successful transition to work by providing cash assistance and work supports, including employment services, SNAP benefits, health insurance, and subsidized childcare. In December 2019, there were 2,579 adults and 6,884 children under age 18 enrolled in Rhode Island Works. Almost 3/4, or 73%, of Rhode Island Works beneficiaries were children, and 42% of the children enrolled were under the age of 6. The maximum monthly Rhode Island Works benefit for a family of 3 is $554 per month, and that has not increased in almost 30 years. The Rhode Island Cash Assistance caseload has declined steadily since 1996, when the program began. Between 1996 and 2019, the Rhode Island Cash Assistance caseload decreased by 79%. The Rhode Island Works caseload declined due to policies implemented in 2008, when the program changed from the Family Independence Program, or FIP, to RI Works. These policies included a new time limit, which included a 48-month lifetime limit for benefits and a periodic time limit, which was removed this year, that limited assistance to no more than 24 months of assistance in any 60-month period, which closed the entire family case when parents reached their time limit. And another change included limiting the eligibility for legal permanent residents to those who had the status for 5 years. Right Care is Rhode Island's Medicaid managed care health insurance program for low-income families and families that provide comprehensive quality health care for children under age 19, with family incomes less than 261% of the federal poverty level, for pregnant women with family incomes less than 253% of the federal poverty level, for parents of eligible children under age 18 with incomes less than 133% of the federal poverty level, and for children who qualify based on a disability or because they are in foster care or receive an adoption subsidy. As of December 31st, 2019, 107,546 children under the age of 19 were enrolled in Right Care, and 2,945 children were enrolled in Right Share. Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP. In Rhode Island, families with children under age 13 who work 20 or more hours per week and earn less than 180% of the federal poverty level are eligible for child care assistance, as well as families that participate in RI Works or the Governor's Workforce Board training programs. In December 2019, there were 10,580 child care subsidies in Rhode Island. Early Head Start is an important two-generation program that provides comprehensive early education and support services to infants, toddlers, and their families with incomes below the federal poverty level. As of October 2019, there were 678 pregnant women, infants, and toddlers enrolled in Early Head Start. Head Start and RI Pre-K. High-quality preschool programs help children gain skills and knowledge prior to kindergarten entry and produce positive outcomes that last well into the school years. As of the 2019-2020 school year, there were 78 Rhode Island pre-K classrooms in Rhode Island, with a total of 1,420 children enrolled. Approximately 45% of low-income children were enrolled in either Head Start or RI Pre-K during the year before kindergarten. Several federal nutrition programs provide nutrition assistance to children and families, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also known as WIC, the National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, the Summer Food Service Program, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. In October of 2019, in Rhode Island, there were 50,827 children enrolled in SNAP. In September in 2019, there were 20,549 women, infants, and children enrolled in WIC. And in October of 2019, there were 68,907 low-income students enrolled in the free and reduced price lunch program. And on average, just under 31,000 children participated in the school breakfast program on a daily basis. Child support provides a mechanism for non-custodial parents to contribute to the financial support of their children. In December of 2019, just over half, 51%, of non-custodial parents under court order in Rhode Island were making child support payments on time and in full. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, also known as LIHEAP, provides assistance to low-income households that may have difficulty paying their energy bills. In fiscal year 2019, Rhode Island was allocated nearly $24 million in LIHEAP funding, which was used to provide nearly 11,000 low-income Rhode Island households with heating assistance. The Housing Choice Voucher Programs, also known as Section 8. In 2019, the average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Rhode Island was $1,651. A family of three living at the federal poverty level would have to spend 91% of its income to pay this rent. Rental vouchers can help low-income families afford the high cost of housing. However, there are not enough federally funded housing choice vouchers to meet the need, and even when families receive a voucher, they may have difficulty finding a landlord who is willing to accept their voucher. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a refundable federal income tax credit for low-income working individuals and families. In 2019, 79,000 Rhode Island worker families and individuals received a total of $183 million in tax credit from the Earned Income Tax Credit for tax year 2018. The federal EITC program is the nation's most effective anti-poverty program for working families. Last year, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a consensus study report entitled A Roadmap to Reducing Child Poverty. This report includes several policy and program recommendations to address its goal of reducing the number of children living in poverty by half in 10 years. The report highlighted 2 plans that would have the highest potential benefit for Rhode Island. The first plan recommended expanding the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credits and the Earned Income Tax Credit, while increasing access to SNAP benefits and housing vouchers for low-income families. The second approach expands on the 2 previously mentioned tax credits, increases the minimum wage, restores eligibility for legal immigrants to obtain means-tested federal program benefits, adds $225 per month per child allowance to the families of all children under age 17, and sets a minimum guaranteed child support of $100 per month per child. These plans would reduce child poverty in Rhode Island by 39 to 44%. So with this information, we have a list of recommendations, beginning with equity. Decrease racial and ethnic disparities by creating racially aware policies that address structural and institutional racism, eliminate discriminatory policies in housing, banking, and education, and prioritize equity. Our second recommendation under the category of equity is to grant driver's licenses to qualified, undocumented Rhode Island workers. For work supports, income, and financial asset building, we recommend improving access to work support programs, including Right Care, SNAP, the Child Care Assistance Program, and Rhode Island Works, by helping families access all programs for which they are eligible, facilitating cross-program enrollment, reducing documentation requirements, simplifying renewal processes, and improving communications. These programs can help families meet their basic needs and move out of poverty and have a proven impact on long-term job retention and asset accumulation. We recommend the increase of the Rhode Island Works benefit from 31% of the federal poverty level to 50%, which is $905, and help parents enrolled in Rhode Island Works successfully transition to work by addressing barriers to employment, connecting parents to education and training opportunities, and identifying career pathways to family-sustaining wages. We recommend helping working families build financial assets by eliminating the asset tax for Rhode Island Works, protecting families from predatory mortgage lending and payday lending, and expanding access to convenient, cost-effective, and safe financial services that would allow families to keep more of their earnings, save, and invest. We also recommend the increase of Rhode Island's Earned Income Tax Credit from 15% of the federal EITC to 20% of the federal EITC while keeping it fully refundable. For healthcare coverage, we recommend ensuring access for all children to affordable, comprehensive health and dental coverage, including Right Care and Right Smiles. Expand Rhode Island Right Care eligibility for pregnant women to 12 months postpartum, ensure access to community-based doula services, and provide Right Care coverage to children who are undocumented. We also recommend maximizing all options available through the Federal Affordable Care Act to create opportunities for children and families to get and keep affordable health coverage. For housing, we recommend providing a sustainable and annual revenue source to support affordable housing construction and housing subsidies. Prohibit discrimination in housing based on a person's lawful source of income, such as Social Security, child support, or a Section 8 voucher or other types of rental assistance. We recommend preventing homelessness by allocating resources for shelter diversion programs, rapid rehousing, and housing stabilization. And we recommend investing in adequate funding in LIHEAP to ensure that all of those who are eligible can receive assistance and protect families with young children from utility shutoffs. Under childcare and early education, we recommend increasing state investments in the child care assistance programs by increasing tiered quality rates for all age groups, so Rhode Island meets federal standards and to ensure equal access. We recommend taking steps to close the compensation gaps for early educators who work with children from birth through age 5, many of whom are women of color who are an essential part of the education system. We also recommend continuing the expansion of Rhode Island Pre-K, one of 4 pre-K programs in the nation that meets all quality benchmarks. For teen pregnancy prevention and support of teen parents, we recommend improving access to healthcare services, including family planning and comprehensive sex education for teens. We recommend expanding educational and economic opportunities for vulnerable teens, especially pregnant and parenting teens, and provide pathways to a high school diploma that work for parenting teens, school to career options, and realistic, affordable post-secondary educational opportunities that give young people a vision for their future and provide real economic opportunities. And we recommend investing in evidence-based home visiting programs that support young parents and their children and improve child development outcomes. For education, we recommend a continued focus on the importance of reading proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. Children who are not proficient in reading by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times less likely to graduate from high school than their proficient readers, and that which profoundly affects their future earnings. We recommend the expanding access to high-quality dual language bilingual programs and increase the capacity of the educators who serve multilingual students. We recommend increasing the percentage of educators of color and increasing access to high-quality after-school and summer learning programs. We recommend improving high school graduation rates by using data to identify students at risk of dropping out and providing individualized academic and social supports, improving school climates, creating 8th to 9th grade transition programs, supporting equitable access to personalized learning and meaningful student connections with adults in schools, and implementing rigorous, engaging, and relevant curricula. We recommend ensuring students from low-income households have access to advanced coursework, take college entrance exams, and complete the free application for federal student aid, get adequate counseling to enroll in college and access financial aid, and target financial aid strategically to increase college enrollment rates. We also recommend the provision of academic, financial, and social supports for students of color, students from low-income households, and first-generation college students to help increase college completion rates. For adult education and jobs, we recommend improving Rhode Island's paid family leave program by increasing the wage replacement and extending the number of weeks to 12 weeks to match neighboring states, so it is a strong support for low-wage workers. We recommend increasing the state's minimum wage to $15 per hour and eliminating the tipped minimum wage. And we also recommend increasing investments in GED attainment programs, literacy and English language programs, and workforce training, key strategies for improving the economic security for low-income parents. Now at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce 5 incredible leaders working to improve the lives of Rhode Island's children and families. U.S. Representative David Cicilline, Sharon Conard-Wells, Director Courtney Hawkins, Linda Katz, and Councilwoman Nirva LaFortune. So we will begin with Congressman David Cicilline. Representative Cicilline, thank you for joining us today from DC as you work on a critical police reform bill, an issue that we know impacts communities of color and children living in poverty. You have been a champion of issues related to child poverty, and we would love your perspective on federal strategies for reducing child poverty. Congressman, if you would mind sharing your video, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think you have to undo it because it's saying the host has it shut off. It says you cannot start your video. The host has asked. Let's see.
Okay, Congressman, I think we can see you now.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out why. No, you, hold on one sec. There you go.
There we are.
Sorry. Thank you for the presentation. And thank you to Kids Count for your incredible work, and to the others who are on the call. Thank you for all that you do. So many of the issues that you raised in the presentation are issues that we really focused on as we were preparing a response to COVID-19. And so in the CARES Act, we provided substantial additional funding for SNAP. We provided a substantial $500 million for WIC. We provided in the CARES Act $8.8 billion to provide meals for kids when schools are closed, $10.5 billion for the Child Care and Development Block Grant. So many of the priorities that you identified in the presentation are priorities that we tried very hard to supplement, because we recognized in response to COVID-19, the challenges for families would be even greater. But I think more broadly, what we've learned throughout this pandemic is that it has really laid bare before the entire country and really the entire world the grotesque income inequality in this country, the health outcome disparities in this country, the housing inequality in this country. And in addition to kind of getting through this pandemic and mitigating the harm that it is causing families in Rhode Island and families all across this country, I think it's also going to serve as a call to action for the Congress of the United States to really drill down and understand how we, in a serious way, combat the kind of inequality that has produced such devastating results in the wake of the pandemic, and how do we position our country and families in this country to never be in those economic conditions again. Because when you look at poor families and communities of color, the impact of this pandemic has been even greater. And so I think it's obviously a really challenging time for the country, but I hope it's going to be a moment in which we decide once and for all to really restructure the economy of this country so that it works for everyone, and that we really attack this pernicious problem of poverty, which has adversely impacted the lives of so many Rhode Islanders and so many people all across this country. And the last thing I just want to mention is, of course, we'll take the lead of Rhode Island Kids Count as we begin the appropriations process to make the investments in the things that we know working families and the working poor and those living in poverty need to lift themselves out of poverty. But I think in addition to what you just mentioned, this very kind of historic moment that we're in, we had a hearing yesterday before the Judiciary Committee where we considered the number of police reforms and law enforcement reforms, and we heard from Mr. Floyd's brother and from others who have been working on this issue for many, many years. And, you know, I brought a sort of unique perspective to this because I was a civil rights lawyer before I got into politics, and most of my civil rights cases were police brutality cases. Then I became mayor of the city of Providence, and at that time we were a police department that was under investigation by the Department of Justice for a patterns and practice investigation. Crime was very seriously on the increase, and the community was really at war with the Providence police. And we, you know, redesigned that police department to a community-based policing model. Elizabeth Burke Bryant was a big part of that and brought the crime rate down to the lowest rate in 40 years, opened 9 neighborhood community substations, and really rebuilt the relationship between the police and the community. And so I took all those experiences to the hearing that we had yesterday, and we're going to mark up a bill on Wednesday that really begins to address systemic racism in policing in this country and the harm that comes particularly to Black boys and men as a result of racial injustice that folks from that community carry with them for the rest of their lives. this is a very long-standing problem in this country. It's a problem that has been a stain on the soul of America since our founding. And because of the demand of people all across this country in response to the murder of George Floyd, the Congress of the United States on Wednesday is going to move forward in a very bold and significant way to hold police officers accountable, to be sure that we are ending racial profiling, ending chokeholds, and a number of other really good things. So I think this will make a real difference in our fight to eradicate poverty in this country as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Representative Cicilline. And we are in challenging times indeed, and really appreciate and are grateful for your strong leadership, because it takes bold action for us to undo the years of wrongs to the communities. So thank you so much for your leadership, and thank you for joining us during this very busy time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Sharon Conard-Wells. Sharon is a board member of Housing Network of Rhode Island. Housing Network is the state association of 20 Rhode Island nonprofit community development corporations whose members have created thousands of affordable housing units throughout Rhode Island. Welcome, Sharon. If you would like to join us and unmute yourself and turn on your video. We would love to hear your reflections on the child poverty issue brief, and specifically would love to hear more about how you are seeing COVID-19 impact the community, and what do you think can be done in the short term and long term to address the housing needs of low-income families.
Thank you and good afternoon. Congratulations on taking on this great issue. And everything that you're saying is so timely, so I just appreciate the effort. The issue brief calls out disparities. I think it's going to be up to us to acknowledge them and to figure out what our response is going to be. With that being said, I wonder what the long-term impact of distance learning has had on the achievement gap for low-income students and all students, in fact. What will the reflection look like in various grade levels in years to come? If distance learning and staggered learning is the way of the future, how will low-wage earners who don't control their schedules, who don't have the resources to purchase the necessary equipment or resource service to participate in long-distance learning, how will those things be addressed, and how will our students fare in the long run in this response to COVID and how we envision the future? I'm also concerned about the new regulations coming to daycare. I'm concerned that they are going to hamstring a lot of daycares, but I'm also concerned that their daycares are not going to be able to open because they just don't have the physical space needed to accommodate the new provisions that a coronavirus is going to commit us to. That being said, from early childhood learning to parents' ability to work, there's much to be concerned about with our daycares as well. If they cannot reopen, we're going to lose slots. If they open and are at risk or have staggered learning and staggered hours, how do you match daycare units to the people's work schedule? I'm also looking at a concern that I have around school safety. Schools that have been traditionally a safety net for families and students. They're a mandatory reporter. Children as victims directly or indirectly of abuse, violence, addiction, or any stressors that are related to childhood poverty or to poverty in general have likely been exacerbated during this time of sheltering in place. So I wonder, what will our response be and where will the resources come from to address those long-term effects? And if students are now staggering, how long will it take before those issues are even recognized in the school system? Specific to housing, conditions such as overcrowding, poor indoor and outdoor air quality, unsanitary surroundings like poorly kept common areas, and rental properties, blighted properties surrounding their homes are all contributors to COVID's susceptibility and as well to its recovery. I'm sorry, I had to clear my throat. Unhoused families have had to distance themselves. How do you distance yourself, and how do you do distance education when you're unhoused? How do you maintain sanitary conditions? How do you wash your hands? How do you maintain good laundry? And then for a while, we even had to drive to take the COVID test. So for our unhoused population, there's a specific level of need that we need to think about, different from just not even having a place to live or having a place that's unsuitable. Then there's all the chronic illness that is associated with those populations. Those things are well documented, but how are they impacting all of these issues going forward? I heard about a couple of children whose families had to actually share the laptops during the distance learning because the districts didn't have enough for each child. So I'm not sure how that affected the distance learning as well, and what that will mean to those households and their achievement long-term around education. So when we think about housing and we think about all of those needs that are connected to housing, and then COVID and the responses, we have to take a holistic view of them. In particular, I want to talk about this. I asked two colleagues who are CDC directors of providing affordable housing. Combined, they had 673 housing units. Of those 673 units, they had 21 positive COVID cases. One set of family was affected, so it wasn't like even there were 21 units. So I want to make that clear. I bring this up because as we draft responses to COVID and we think about affordable housing and how to fund it, we may need to change some things. We may need to look at maintenance. We may need to look at screening. But I hate to see an overall sweeping overregulation or overhaul of policies to overreact to what doesn't seem to be a total crisis within our community of CDCs. So we may actually have some things that can be learned, but we also may have some solutions to bring to the table. Some things that we can support in the short term: adequate funding for staff. Not-for-profits, and in particular CDCs in this case, hire from the community. We often hire those people and train them. So we are part of your workforce development partners. Consider us that and give us the funding so that we can adequately provide so that our staff are not part of your low-income numbers. We have people on our waiting list who are likely to be called soon for an apartment. If they've just gotten back to work, they may not have the amount they need for a deposit. We need to address regulations that allow for partial payments, or we need grants to help those families who are just returning to work qualify to get into our units and provide the security department they need, not just for us, but for any unit that they would like to move into. I'd love to see some support for another state housing bond, but also some local housing bonds. We need funds for acquisition and pre-development, coupled with tax adjustments during pre-development. We need funding for relevant supportive programs: daycare, commercial kitchens, foster programs, gardens, after-school programs, financial literacy, home by education, arts, and even of West Elmwood's own Dunamis program are examples of programs that are located or connected to or within the housing development. These holistic strategies are part of what helps to look at the household as a whole. Somewhere I read that a child loses 2 to 3 months of education with each housing move. We need to look at eviction prevention supports on an immediate basis. The Housing Network, the Coalition for the Homeless, Homes Rhode Island, Housing Works, they already exist. And Youthville, invite us to the table early. We have solutions, we are part of the solution, working together to help set programs and policies, design programs and set policies is something that we can bring as valuable. Can we revisit the school funding to address disparities across zip codes? There's a lot of talk about this zip codes dictating the outcome of a child's future. So let's address that with school funding. Some longer term issues. Can we expedite the development process by updating the state's comprehensive permit law? Can we remove expensive, redundant bureaucracy in planning, development, and construction? There are zoning supports that should support multifamily housing in more locations than is currently allowed throughout Rhode Island. The state legislature can fix the transfer tax for not-for-profits, and it can stop attacking the 8% law because it is really a key to sustainable, affordable housing. With that, I'd just like to say that Homes Rhode Island has published a framework for action that addresses 4 topic areas. It's a good idea of a comprehensive approach that could lead to some tangible progress. There's no single strategy that will work. This is just not a one-size-fits-all universe, but it does require hearing from all voices from the start and listening to what is said. With that, I thank you for your time and for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for raising up the critical need for having a holistic view and approach, and how housing and education, workforce development, how that all needs to come together as policymakers and community leaders begin to think about how we can respond to our current pandemic. Thank you so much, Sharon. It is my pleasure to introduce Courtney Hawkins, Director of Rhode Island Department of Human Services. Rhode Island DHS delivers critical safety net and other supportive services to more than 300,000 families, adults, children, elders, individuals with disabilities, and veterans every year. Director Hawkins became the leader of DHS in June of 2017 and has been a vocal champion for Rhode Island's children. Director Hawkins is a critical member of Governor Raimondo's COVID response team, and it was announced yesterday that DHS will issue a one-time payment to Rhode Island Works families to assist Rhode Island families in highest need during this health crisis. And families who utilize SNAP will now have increased access to nutritious food through online vendors. Thank you, Director Hawkins, for your leadership and being a tremendous advocate for low-income families. We welcome your reflections. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear what DHS is doing to address children in poverty, and specifically if you can discuss 2-generation strategies to lift families out of poverty, and what do you see as DHS's role in addressing the needs of children in poverty. So Director Hawkins.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Kids Count and the other panelists for joining me today on this important issue. I think you've done a spectacular job with this issue brief, highlighting what is the topic that keeps me awake at night and the reason why I come to work every day, and certainly I think for the rest of my colleagues at DHS, why we do what we do. A couple of reflections that I have on the brief, and then I did want to speak specifically to some of what DHS has been doing recently and where I hope we're going to go. As I said, I think you did a great job capturing the issue, and what it shows us is that as a state in Rhode Island, we have not moved the needle on child poverty, and that families continue to struggle. The percentage of kids in poverty go up and down a percentage here or there, but our interventions are just not sufficient. And while there's excellent documentation of lots of programs that I operate and others operate, it is not enough. And if we're gonna actually move the needle and change the trajectory for kids and families, we have to do more. I also thought you did a great job at documenting the long-term effects of poverty on kids and families. Some of you who know me know that I'm a native Rhode Islander, but I went away for a while and came back. And the thing that has been the hardest thing for me in my job over the past 3 years is understanding what my neighbors and colleagues believe about families in poverty in our state. A lot of that is rooted in racism and is deep to our community, and is a lot of what I advocate against every day. But until we face that head on and acknowledge that if we don't provide the proper supports to folks, that they're never going to have the opportunity to achieve the goals that they have for their family, we will not be successful. And it's interesting because often I'll have conversations with people who are big champions of education and will say that they believe we should be investing in education. But then when I say we should be investing in programs like Rhode Island Works or childcare, they'll tell me that that's not important. And it's the lack of connection between a child's future achievement and the opportunities we provide for their family to care for them when they're young. That is a direct connection that I often try to make for people, but that I feel like I shouldn't have to make anymore. And so would ask folks here to help us to continue to remind people that kids are not going to be successful in school if they're hungry, and that parents are not going to be able to provide the supports that their kids need if they are worrying about how to keep a roof over their head every night. I think COVID has shone a bright light on these inequities and the lack of support. You know, our families have been living on the edge already, and this pandemic has really, as the congressman noted, has really illustrated the challenges that we have in front of us. And so I hope that we will be able to build on some of what we've implemented and some of the momentum and the goodwill that has been shown during the pandemic, and build on that to like real future long-term supports for folks. So a few notes about what we've been focused on at DHS. We just have most of all wanted to be sure that families have access to benefits that they need so that they're able to focus on their own health and their family's well-being. And due to some great work of our federal delegation, we were able to increase SNAP benefits for folks. We were the first state in the country to implement pandemic EBT. We were able to safely reopen childcare, ensuring that families have the opportunity to go to work, and also that kids have the exposure to the critical supports that we know our childcare system provides them. And as you noted, Paige, great support from our governor, we were able to this month provide additional financial support to Rhode Island Works, knowing that they have been in some ways the most affected and have had limited resources to additional financial supports. And I want to thank Linda Katz and the coalition for pushing us to do that and for advocating for that, because it was an important accomplishment. More broadly, I've spent the past 3 years doing my best on behalf of the department to fight for more resources, and we have been successful in implementing tiered reimbursement, increasing our childcare rates of reimbursement. We were successful with a lot of advocates helping us last year in getting rid of the really detrimental and arbitrary 24-month Rhode Island Works time limit. We've been on the team supporting the implementation of state pre-K, and we had a slate of really important policy initiatives ahead of us for this year. One of them was the getting rid of the asset test for Rhode Island Works, as you all recommended, along with another more increases in our child care program. I want to say that I'm really worried about where we're going to be going into fiscal year 21, and that I just need everyone to help us to advocate that our values as a state are going to be reflected in the budget that we enact, and that there are going to be hard decisions that need to be made, but those decisions should not be made on the backs of poor people. And would ask that everyone pick a proposal, whether it be a revenue proposal or a shift in funding. You know, we're a state that invests more in general revenue in our correctional facilities than we do in institutions of public higher ed, for example. We're going to have to pick those areas, and we're going to have to fight hard so that we don't pull back benefits from people, and that we continue to make investments that we know that we need. And would look forward to working with everyone on this, and hope that you will continue to help make the argument that social justice advocacy is rooted in our budget as a state, and that we need, now is not the time to pull back resources from people who need it. Related to whole family approaches, this would be an area where we hope we'll be able to make more investment in next year. And I wanted to acknowledge a great example of where I think there's great whole family work happening. I know Shannon Carroll from the Genesis Center is on this call, where they've done a fantastic job of pairing comprehensive adult education and workforce with early childhood. My department wants to do more of that and wants to be able to make it easier for programs to be able to do that. And with the right funding allocations, we'll be able to. We certainly have a vision and commitment to that. Lastly, I just felt like it was really important in a conversation like this, when we're talking about the impacts of poverty on families, it can feel like, there's so much stacked against kids in poverty, and there's so much to overcome. I do think it's important to acknowledge how resilient kids and families are in Rhode Island, and that resiliency is the foundation for future greatness, and that we have to hold on to that, and we've got to invest in kids and families so that they can achieve that greatness. But that many of the families that I serve are overcoming unbelievable obstacles every day on behalf of their kids. And I stand in awe of them, and it's why I fight every day on their behalf. And know everyone here will join me in celebrating that resiliency, while we also advocate so that their lives don't have to be quite so hard. So I'll stop there so the rest of the panelists have time, but thank you again for having me today.
Thank you so much, Director Hawkins, and thank you for a really concrete call to action, so folks know what they can do to help to support efforts to improve the lives of low-income children and families. And thank you for acknowledging the resilience of our low-income children and families. It is important to always have that asset-based view of our children, because that is the love that we give and believe in. Combating the racism that they also encounter are critical steps for us to be able to improve the lives of all of our neighbors. So thank you for that. I am so pleased to introduce Linda Katz. She is the co-founder and policy director of the Economic Progress Institute. EPI is a nonpartisan research and policy organization dedicated to improving the economic well-being of low and modest income Rhode Islanders. Thank you, Linda, for joining us today. We would love to hear your reflections on the issue brief, and if you can discuss EPI's efforts to increase the Rhode Island Works benefit, and also your work with immigrant communities to address poverty.
Okay. Thank you. Should I start?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you, Paige. I'm really honored to have been asked to participate today and congratulate you on a wonderful issue brief that I think pulls together really important data and reminds us that we need to be addressing all these different issues if we truly want to make a dent in poverty. I think the recommendations are really excellent. I'm thank Director Hawkins for her advocacy on behalf of Rhode Island Works families, and we're all very pleased to know that there's a one-time payment that families are going to be receiving in the next week. That's going to be very welcome. A few facts about the Rhode Island Works program. As Paige mentioned in her overview, the benefit has not been adjusted in 30 years, back since 1991. Had it been adjusted to keep pace with inflation, most other benefit programs do, it would be double the amount now. And I think it's worth noting that in 1991, the Rhode Island Works benefit was 60% of the federal poverty level. Today, as Paige noted, it's only 30%. So that's two things. Kids on the program are living in really abject poverty. And secondly, the program is not helping those kids who are living in extreme poverty. As Paige mentioned, there are 16,000 children living in extreme poverty. Those, about a third are receiving Rhode Island Works. If we had kept the benefit flowing with inflation, we would have been able to provide that additional assistance to more very poor kids. And importantly, Rhode Island Works is a very unique workforce development door for single parents. So as we squeeze the program, we're also squeezing parents out of opportunity for workforce development. A couple of other points, and then I'll talk about our Raising Rhode Island campaign. We're the only New England state that hasn't adjusted the benefit, and we now have the lowest benefit among all of the New England states. The average benefit that we give to a family is $6 per person per day, which should be shocking to everybody. So at Economic Progress Institute, we have undertaken we started last year and we're continuing this year, a Raising Rhode Island campaign, the goal of which is pretty modest. It's just to get families on Rhode Island Works out of deep poverty. So from 30% of the poverty level to 50% of the poverty level over 2 years. And I know Senator Murray is on the call. She is the sponsor of a bill in the Senate that would accomplish this, and Rep. Morin is the sponsor in the House. We know that the bills won't pass as freestanding bills, but we are hoping that we can see some additional movement in the 2021 budget to help families and to do something to permanently increase the benefit. We're proposing that the benefit increase to 40% of the federal poverty level in the coming year, and then to 50% in the year after that, and then keep pace with inflation. What this would mean in terms of the income for a family is that the benefit would rise from $554 for a family of 3 to $724 in the first year. The family's overall income, if you count SNAP as part of their income, would rise from a little over $1,000 a month to $1,228. The cost to do this for 3/4 of the coming year, raise the benefit to 40% of family, 40% of poverty, is about $4.5 million. What's important to know is the state receives a block grant from the federal government. The welfare program was block granted in 1996. The block grant is $96 million. We use only about 1/4 of it to provide assistance to the families, and we use the money for other purposes in the state. And we invest not a single dollar of our own taxpayer monies. Since 2010, no general revenues have been invested in Rhode Island Works families. And I think, as Courtney noted, our budget is a statement of our priorities. These families are the ones that got cut in 2010 to save general revenue money. We think it's time to invest either some more of the block grant or some general revenue funds to support our poorest kids. A second issue for the campaign, and this arises out of the fact that the governor has in her proposed 2021 budget an increase in the clothing allowance from $30 a year to $100 a year, which would be a little extra help for families to buy clothing. It would increase the total investment in clothing for kids on Rhode Island Works to $300,000. Again, a sort of drop in the bucket. But it's only provided to families, to children age 4 and older. We know that toddlers need clothes and babies, so we'd like to see the clothing allowance provided to all families. You can think of this as the governor has now made an investment this year in 20 Rhode Island Works families with the one name, and that in 2021 we're looking to make another investment in these families by a full clothing allowance for all kids, as well as providing an increase in the benefit. There are 36 grassroots advocacy provider organizations and members of the faith community who are part of the campaign, in addition to about 200 people who have joined individually to help get our message across. Had the chat function not been polluted, I would post in the chat the website, but it's easy to remember. It's raisingri.org. And if you can go there, find out more information, both about Rhode Island Works and the campaign, and you can join us in our advocacy if this is an issue close to your heart. I also want to mention that there's the Interfaith Coalition and Raising Rhode Island campaign will be hosting together a community conversation on Rhode Island Works coming this Monday from 11 to 12. And you can find more information about that on the Interfaith Coalition website. I'll go really quickly in terms of the immigrant issues. For Rhode Island Works, as Paige mentioned, as part of the budget cutting measures back in 2008, we took all lawful permanent resident kids and parents off of the Rhode Island Works program until they had status for 5 years. In every other public benefit program, at least the children are able to get cash assistance right away. The public charge fear that has been created by the federal administration has meant that many families who are really eligible for benefits, either for themselves or for their children, are fearful of getting benefits because they are afraid it will have an impact on their immigrant status. Most of the time it won't. So we're trying to get the message out too through the Immigrant Coalition to make sure that families apply for the benefits that they need and are entitled to. And I guess I'll just close with saying that, people may think, oh, it's impossible if we want to try to get health insurance coverage for all kids, including undocumented children. Well, we did that once in Rhode Island in 1996 or 1997 after the federal government limited access to benefits to both legal and undocumented immigrants. The state of Rhode Island stood up and said, we're going to treat all our kids the same. We're going to use our general revenue dollars to make sure that every kid has a health insurance card. Again, because of budget constraints, the undocumented children lost that coverage. That is something that I think we could step up a campaign around in the coming year to make sure that all children have access to health insurance as a pathway into quality care. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I hope everyone will take the opportunity to visit the Raising Rhode Island website. So that's raisingri.org. So please go check it out and please join the efforts. And tonight is now my pleasure to introduce our final panelist, Councilwoman Nirva LaFortune. Councilwoman LaFortune represents Ward 3 on the Providence City Council. She is also the Assistant Director for Scholars Programs and Diversity Initiatives at Brown University, where she ensures underrepresented students receive holistic academic advising and support services. Thank you for joining us today, Councilwoman. We would love to hear your reflections on the issue brief. And we also know that education has been a road out of poverty for many folks. And we'd love to hear if you have any comments or reflections on the important steps you think that need to be taken to ensure that low-income children and children of color have access to high-quality education opportunities. Councilwoman, thank you.
Yes, I think the host has to take me, allow me to do the video. There we go. Hi, how are you? Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank you, Paige, and Elizabeth, and the whole Kids Count team for your continued advocacy and awareness for kids and families. Thank you, Congressman Cicilline, for the work that you are doing at the federal level to create policies that address disparities. Director Hawkins, your advocacy work and just your dedication to ensure families have access to social services is superb. And Linda Katz, who I admire, I don't know if I ever said it, but for providing a platform to illustrate the economic disparities that impact Rhode Islanders and to help drive policy reform. Thank you for the brief. It truly highlighted the challenges, the various barriers that our families and our children face right here in our state, and truly illustrated some of the four core urban communities where we have high rates of poverty, and various disparities, which include education, health, economic opportunities, etc. We know, just in general, and I know that many people have been talking about COVID-19 and saying how this has illustrated the disparities that exist within our communities, but these disparities have existed for quite some time. There have been explicit government policies or de jure segregation, which has been designed to ensure the segregation of African Americans or communities of color from their white peers, and multiple discriminatory practices. The impact, as we have seen in the past and how we're seeing much more now, has been devastating. And particularly on marginalized communities. There are increasing economic, education, health, opportunity gaps, which also deny families and children to thrive. We think about policies such as Brown versus Board of Education, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that have been established to help narrow these disparities. However, we still see structures that continue to perpetuate de facto segregation. The city of Providence and the state has, made some strides to address some of these disparities. However, I think for many years we have been reactive rather than proactive. Just thinking about some of the items that you talked about, the lack of investment in poor families, the lack of investment in single parents, which the numbers are significant. The poverty level amongst our Native American population in our state, which we don't talk about. So we have to increase these investments. We have to allocate funding at both the state level as well as the city levels into these communities. Some of the things that the city I know has been working on, and I've also been an advocate of and has also put in resolutions or ordinance, is around increasing pre-K for our young people, in trying to increase or narrow the housing gap. We just passed a piece of legislation which would allocate funds into a housing fund so that we can start building affordable housing. However, that has to be a priority at the state level. You can't expect students to thrive in school or to narrow the health gap amongst poor families if they don't have access to affordable housing or safe and clean housing. You also can expect families to find employment if there aren't opportunities for training. So in the city of Providence, we have First Source, we have MBE, WBE, but what we're hearing from several of our minoritized communities or communities of color is that they still don't have access to these opportunities. And so we have to invest in training. We have to invest in training in our young people to create pathways not only to college, but also create pathways to the workforce. We also have to invest in our adults to ensure that they're at an economic advantage so that they're able to purchase a home and they're able to work and make a reasonable wage in order to pay their bills and to take care of their families, and that they do have access to healthcare. Some of the things also, other things that I've supported is also support the doula bill, which we hopefully our state legislators can really, and our community members can continue to amplify the importance of providing that resource, particularly to our communities of color and Black women. Black women experience the highest rates of maternal mortality in the country. We're also seeing the access to affordable healthcare, and also our immigrant population. I recently introduced an ordinance, which would be the residential housing ordinance, which would require any type of development, particularly for the developments that are happening in the downtown area, for them to allocate a certain percentage of those units to affordable housing so that we're creating mixed income communities. We've seen how some of the policies such as urban renewal that has driven or has displaced communities of color right here in our state, but has also segregated communities. There's a significant gap between parts of the state as well as within our cities, parts of Providence. And so we need to ensure that all families have an advantage, and it's not those who are affluent. In terms of, narrowing the gap and advocating to narrow the gap within education, I'm a Providence graduate, like Director Hawkins, and I also went away for many years and came back. But what I've seen throughout the years, and especially working in higher education for the past 14 years, is that the students who suffer the most are students from our urban communities. They come into college, they get accepted, they work really hard, they're prepared to do well, and they find themselves taking remedial courses, or they're unable to pass your STEM courses or these core courses that allow them to move forward. And what happens is they drop out. So we're seeing high attrition in certain areas and within our colleges. So one of the things that our state can do is really invest in summer learning opportunities for our students, working with our local higher education institutions to ensure that our students are narrowing the literacy gap, the math gap. The other thing our state can work with our educational institutions is also investing in summer bridge programs to provide students an opportunity to seamlessly transition into college. These programs have, there are many studies on various programs throughout the nations at Ivy Leagues to some of our state colleges. And there has been, they have been successful in supporting students in one, allowing students to take some of these courses to better prepare them for the fall. Two, helping students transition to college, especially those who are coming from some of our marginalized communities, and they're first generation. They've never engaged with anyone at the college level, and they struggle just to navigate. So it's not that they're unable to be successful, but they don't always know how to access the resources or the tools to do so. And I spoke a bit about investing in adult training opportunities, but we also need to invest in social emotional support for our students. When we think about these disparities, lack of health care, socioeconomic disparities, our kids are struggling, and this impacts their mental state, their emotional state. And we have to ensure that we have counselors and social workers in our schools, and we have to prioritize it. We also have to prioritize our non-English speaking students. Right now in our funding formula, we don't, the funding formula does not weigh for EL learners. And we have to make sure that is calculated in our funding formula, and to also prioritize communities that have high populations of EL. And that ranges from multiple cultures and multiple languages, but also training teachers and incentivizing teachers to go into the teaching profession so that they can see it as a profession that not only do they want to pursue, but it's something that is sustainable, that they'll stay in, because we do see high attrition, particularly amongst teachers of color, because of burnout or lack of training. So thinking about creating some sort of teacher residency program and incentivizing teachers to live in communities in which they serve our students. One of the main reasons why, and I started speaking about it earlier, why I'm such an advocate around public education is because I'm a graduate and I know firsthand what it means to go into a space or into a higher education institution. In my freshman year of college, I actually went to an HBCU thinking that, well, I'm going into a school where there's going to be students who look like me, but I was ill prepared. In fact, I failed every single one of my core classes, and I had to take them again my second semester, which was quite costly. And I'll probably be paying for that for the rest of my life.
However, we need to ensure that our students, once they graduate from our high schools, they're ready to be successful. And also a priority with the state working with our local districts. Right now in Providence, we all know that the state has taken over the school district. And I can see why this bold approach was taken, because our district has been failing our students for quite some time. However, in order to support our students, to support our families, to create a structure that works for them, we have to do it collaboratively. We have to allow our community members to have a voice, to be part of the design of this new structure that will exist and support our students. But more importantly, we have to invest in our students. And we have to ensure that regardless of what school you go to, whether the school is on the east side of town or the west end or the south side, that you are going to receive a quality education. And that all too should be a priority of the state, because right now in the state constitution, that language is not there. It's missing. In Massachusetts, that language is there. So we need to ensure that our students can receive a quality education. It is a right for them to receive a quality education, and we have to codify it. And also expand Rhode Island Promise, so that it's not only at CCRI, but students can actually obtain a 4-year education and not worry about affording it. These are ways to create pathways, because when we see our students, if our students are able to thrive, then these are the same people, the same individuals that are going to come back into the community and reinvest into the community. And we're also creating models for our young people. And hopefully these are the people in the future who are going to be the teachers, who are going to be the scientists, who are going to be the mayors, the governors, and they'll be more invested. But we have to prioritize initiatives that support marginalized communities. And it's a shame that it's now that we're really taking a critical look into this because of COVID-19, but these disparities have existed for years, and there has been policies that have perpetuated it. So I do hope moving forward that the state, the city, the various organizations could work together to support our students, but again, more importantly, prioritize our minoritized community. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilwoman, for your really comprehensive and thoughtful insights. And we really appreciate you spending this afternoon with us today. To wrap up, I'll hand it back over to Elizabeth. And thank you again to all of our panelists.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been an amazing gathering of people who have been able to join us today, and an amazing presentation by Paige Closhas-Parks. Thank you, Paige. And many thanks to our incredible panel of Congressman David Cicilline, Sharon Conard-Wells, Director Courtney Hawkins, Linda Katz, and Councilwoman Nirva LaFortune. It was just an amazing discussion. On behalf of Rhode Island Kids Count, I want to apologize for the disturbing, hateful, and racist comments which came into the chat box towards the beginning of our event today. We were able to turn the chat box off. We greatly apologize for this. We will do all we can to prevent that kind of thing in the future. It makes us want to say stronger than ever that we are united in partnership with all of you to do everything we can as an organization with our partners to end racism and to address racism in all its forms. I also want to end on a call to action note. This has been a real view of the whole child and family in terms of poverty, the racial and ethnic disparities that need to close, the opportunities that need to be there for all of our kids and families. I urge you to look at the issue brief, especially the recommendations, which really are many ideas for your effective advocacy, especially in the next few weeks and months. Your voice is needed more than ever. We look forward to working with you. I also want to thank Jen Capaldo from our staff and Stephanie Geller and Katie Chu for their efforts to put this webinar together. And I ask that anyone who has a question that didn't get to ask it because we've run out of time, please get in touch with us via email and we will send a response. So that closes us out. Thank you so much again for attending this issue brief release, Child Poverty in Rhode Island. And good luck with your work to advocate for policies that will reduce poverty and make our state better. Thank you so much for joining us.